In this video, I'll be showing you the different types of routes you can create in NextJS, and we'll be seeing how to create these routes in the pages router as well as the app router. Let's start from the most basic route. NextJS uses file-based routing, which means if you want to create a new route, then you have to create the new file or new files or folders. For the pages router, all you have to do is create your file under pages. In this case, I have index.js, which is going to be the root, and this is what it looks like for the root page. For the app router, here we're going to create a page.js under the app, and this page.js is going to be the page for the root. I have pretty much the same thing I have in the pages router, and this is what it looks like. For the pages router, if I want to create something like features/routing, well, here in pages, I'm going to create feature/routing.js. Then paste this component here. I'm just going to come to this index.js and put this link here. And here we have this for the home page. And if I click on this, this is going to take us to feature/routing, which is pointing to this component. For the app router, if I want to do the same thing, I have to come to app, and I'm going to create a directory feature, create another directory called routing. And in here, I'm going to create a page.js. And then I can paste this here also. And I'll come here to also paste this link. And we come here, we have routing feature. When I click on it, it takes us to feature/routing. What about metadata? Because for example, if you come here, you can see that this is localhost 3000, but I want to have a better title for it. Well, here I can use the head component, and then I have my title as well as other meta tags I'm interested in. And we come back here, you can see now we have routing feature page. Coming to the app router, using the head component will not work. Instead, what you have to do is to export this object metadata. Here we can have our title, and then we can have every other meta information, and here you can now see that our title is now routing feature page. In this case, the metadata is static, but you can also make it dynamic if you want to get something from a server, for example. What about routing and navigation? Well, as we have already seen, you can import the link components from NextJS. You can link the way you want. This works fine with the pages router as well as with the app router. But if you also want to do a programmatical routing, you can use router. So in the home, for example, I can have my router. I can have this function on click button, which is going to call router.push feature/routing. And then I can have this button, which I'm just going to put beside the link. Now, if we go back to the home page, we have this link, or when I click this button, it also takes me to the feature/routing. I can do the same thing for the app router. I have my use router, I have my router.push, and I have my button. But when we come here, we're going to have an error. You have a server component and import this. Use next navigation instead. So instead of using next/router, I'm going to use next/navigation. When I come here, I'm still going to have another error because using next router only works in a client component, but by default, I have a server component, which means I have to come to the top here and say use clients. This is going to work fine. If I go to the home page, we have this, and when you click on this button, programmatically, we are navigated to feature/routing. So far, we have static routes, but what about dynamic routes? Well, here in the pages, I can have a directory called user, a route with a square bracket syntax. Here, I'm going to have username.js. Then I'm going to have this component called user details. It takes the username prop, and we just put the username prop here. And then I'm going to have my get server side props because I want to do some things on the server, like maybe get the user information from the server, and that username is going to be available on the context.query. Then I can pass this as props to this component. Now, when I go back here, if I should route to user/Deeecode, you're going to see we have user Deeecode here, user/Dillion, user Dillion here. And if you don't want to use get server side props for this, you can also use the use router. So here, use router, import this again, get the username from router.query, and it's going to work the same way. The only thing here is that I'm accessing the param on the client side instead of the server side. With the app router, what I'm going to have is in app here, user/square bracket syntax username, but instead of having .js, I'm going to have /page.js. Then I'm going to have my component here. This is going to take a prop called params, and in this params, I can access the username and have the username here. When I type user Dillion, I have user Dillion, user Deeecode, I have user Deeecode here. I can also choose to use router here if I want, but that would mean I need to change this to a client component. Another thing I can do is a catch-all segment. For example, I want to have a page posts / this is going to take username so that the username can be a param, and this is going to take slug then .js. So I have this. In this component, we have the username and slug prop, and here in our get server side props, we're going to get the username and slug from the query, and we can pass it at props and render here. I can go to post /Dillion /how to next.js, and this is going to show here. But instead of having this dynamic dynamic route here and this dynamic route here, I can use a catch-all segment. So I'm going to delete this username, and in this post, I'm basically going to have something like info.js. So this is going to capture all of the parts that comes after post. And if I paste this and refactor, we're still going to have username and slug here. But in the query, what I'm going to get now is info, which is going to be an array. And for this array, the first item can be username and the second item can be slug, and we have info. And if I come here and I refresh, we have the same thing. If I should make Deeecode the username, you see the user is Deeecode. If I should have how to Next.js route as the last part, we have this as the slug. In the app router, the same concept applies. Here in my app, I'm going to have post / info / page.js. Then I'm going to paste all of this. The component is going to receive a params prop, and in this params, I can get the info, and then I can destructure this info because it's an array. The first item username, the second item slug equals info. And now when we come here, if I go to this place and type post / Dillion / how to React, we're going to have the user as Dillion and the slug as how to react. What about a 404 page? Here in the pages router, I can create 404.js and I can paste this component page not found, this link, and we go back here. If I should go to a route not exist, this is going to point to our 404 page. For the app router, I'm going to create a file called notfound.js. I actually expected that this file is going to be something like notfound/page.js, but apparently just use notfound.js. Paste the same code here, and now we come to our application. If I should go to a route that doesn't exist, it's going to point us to our notfound.js file. What about API routes? Well, in the pages router, I'm going to create a directory called API, and I can have all my API routes here. I'm going to have one where I call user.js. I'm just going to paste this, so when you go to user.js, if the rec method is get, we're just going to return this to the browser or to the client. I have this user's data demo, which I just copied from ChatGPT. And now if we go here and we go to localhost 3000/API/user, we're going to get this JSON that comes from the server. For the app router, use what Next.js calls route handlers. For route handlers, we can have, for example, API as a directory, API/user. Instead of having API user.js, I'm going to have user/route.js. So just like in Next.js, pages are directory/page.js. With routes, you have route.js, and this is what it looks like. So we have a function called get. This is going to handle the get request that comes to this route. This will handle post and as well any other methods that you want. And if we go back here, localhost 3000/API/user, we get the same JSON coming from the server. You can also do dynamic API routes with the pages router. So here in API, I can have user/username.js. I could as well also just put this in user and give this index.js like this. That also works. So here in the username, I'm going to have this here. So I have my handler. If it's a get request, I get the username from rec.query. I find the user from my user's data, whatever. You probably be doing this with a database or something else. The user exists, I return the user, else I return this. And now if we come to the demo, I'm just going to copy this username. Now we go back here. If I go to user/this username, well, I find the user. But if I enter Deeecode, well, Deeecode is not part of the random data, so I have user null. Here in the app router, in my API user route.js, I'm going to create a new file, which is going to be username. And this username is also going to have its own route.js. I'm going to paste this. This is going to be a request again, but not only will this function get the request, but it's also going to get an object where I can get the params. I can get the username from the params, then I can check for that user. If the user exists, I'm going to return this data where I have the user object, and here I have the username. But if the user does not exist, I'm going to return user null status 404. And now when we go back here, if I go to user/this username, we find the user, but if I should enter Deeecode, well, this isn't going to work again. What about middlewares? Well, middlewares are kind of the same with pages and the app router. So here I can create my middleware.js, and I'm just going to paste this here. So I have my middleware where I'm going to do something before the requests are completed. But let's just say if a request is going to /users, I want to redirect the user here. So now when I come here, if I go to /users, this is saying not found. Oh, that's because I put the middleware under pages instead of putting it under SRC. Okay, now it's under SRC. If we go back, you can see that when I go to pages/users, it redirects us to the home page. And depending on the logic you want, you can do that in this middleware file. And I'm going to copy this middleware file, go to the app router, and here I'm going to create middleware.js, and I'm going to paste the same thing, and it's still going to work. Go to /users, it redirects us to the home page. And as well, you can do whatever logic you want to do with cookies, headers, whatever stuff. You can do that here in this middleware. What about internationalization? We can use different libraries with NextJS for internationalization. It's a bit hard to pronounce, but I'm just going to use NextIntl for this example. So in my file explorer, I have these messages here where I have different JSONs for different languages. For the English, I have welcome to my website. For French, I have bienvenue so much. Okay, I'm not going to mess that up. For Dutch, I have welcome up my canal. Well, that's because I speak a bit of Dutch. And then in my next config, I'm going to have the i18n config here. These are the locales I'm interested in, and this is the default locale. And now I can go to the index page. I'm going to import use translations from NextIntl. And then here where I have my websites, I'm going to have T, and I'm going to access welcome. So here I have T use translations, and I'm going to point to welcome, which if we go to the en.json is going to point to this place here. I'm basically following the NextIntl documentation for this. Depending on the library you're using, it might be different. And now when I come here, this works. If I go to /en, this also works. If I go to fr, now I have the French version, and if I go to nl, I have the Dutch version. In the case of the app router, the steps are longer, but again, check out the docs. I'm just going to fast forward to when I have all of this set up. I finished following the docs. I had to make changes to some files like the middleware, this file here. I already have my messages here. Now when I come here, I have this on en, but if I go to the fr, I have the fr version. If I go to the nl, I have the Dutch version here. So these are the routing options available to both the pages router and the app router. For the rest of this video, we'll be looking at routing features that are only available in the app router. Route groups in Next.js. This feature of the app router allows you to group routes together. So for example, I can have a group in this app directory. I'm going to call this features. I'm going to have another group, and this is the syntax for it. You have open and close parentheses, and here I'm going to have another group called services. For these features, I can move this feature directory here. So we have features, feature, and routing. Oh, by the way, you can see how VS Code groups these routes together because they are empty. A simple way to turn that off is go to settings, compacts, folder. This is it. I'm just going to turn that off, and now it's broken down. I can easily see what the tree structure looks like. Just a little tip, but like I was saying, we have this group, and now we have feature routing. Now this features is not going to be included on the URL. It's just going to be a group. If I go to features/feature/routing, this is not going to work because this features is not part of the URL. The URL is actually going to be /feature/routing. This is just a group. But then in this services group, I can have a route which is going to be service/home-delivery/page.js. And I'm going to paste this here, home delivery service. Again, this services is not part of the URL. It's going to be service/home delivery. So if we come here and I go to /service/home delivery, well, this is what it looks like. Currently the styling is not perfect, but anyways, you get the idea. But you're probably thinking, why would you want to group routes if they're not going to be part of the URL? Well, one very good use case of this is by grouping routes, you can have layouts that applies to specific routes. So for example, in these features, I can create a layout.js and paste this. Now this layout is going to apply to everything that is under this features group. And in the same way, I can come to services, add layout.js, paste this here, and this layout is going to apply to everything under the services group. And now if I go here, you can see this is what the services layout is. But if I go back to the URL and I go to feature/routing, since feature/routing is under this features group, then this layout is going to apply to that route. So this can be very helpful when you want to have different layouts for different routes. Parallel routes in Next.js. This feature allows you to render multiple pages simultaneously. It's an interesting feature. Not everybody might need it, but this can be useful when you're building very custom dashboards, for example. The syntax for that is here in app, I am going to create a parallel route, parallel. The syntax is @ and then you have the name of the parallel route. So I'm going to have at features. In here, I'm going to have page.js. I'm going to paste this here. So this is just the features page. Let me comment this delay for now. This is not going to be part of the URL. So it's not like if you go to /features, anything is going to happen. So if I come here and I go to /features, we're going to have 404. So that is not part of the route. This is just like a name for this parallel route. I can have another parallel route for services. So here again, the at services, then I can put my page.js, paste this here for the services page. Now that I have this route, how can I access them? Well, if I go here, you can see that features and services are directly under the app, which means this layout directly under the app, I can access those parallel routes. So here we have children, but another prop that this layout is going to receive is features, and another one services for the parallel services route. And here where I have the children, after the children, I can put the features and the services, and it's going to render them as part of the layout. So now if I come to the home page, you can see that we have all of this coming from the root page.js, but that is not all. If you go below, you can now see we have this features page, the parallel route for features, and we have this also for services rendered as part of the layout. You're probably thinking, why would you want to do this? Why not just use components? I'll answer that question in another video where I dive deeper into parallel routes. But one of the benefits here is you can have individual pages which do all of the pages stuff, get things from server, have their own layout, and you can nest them into other pages. For example, in a dashboard, you might have different sections which are getting different data. One section is getting analytics, the other is getting the money in your wallet, all of these things. But let's say this features page, for example, delays for 3 seconds to get something from the server. And then in these features, I can have a loading.js, which NextJS is going to render while the features is getting what it needs to get from the server before the JSX is ready. Now, if we go here and refresh, you can see that features is loading, services has been rendered, and once features is ready, this has also been rendered. Again, not everybody needs this, but the more custom your application looks like, this can be very handy. And the last route we're going to be looking at for this video is intercepting routes. This is a very handy feature of NextJS which allows you to intercept some routes when navigating. I have a video on this where I dive deeper into it and I'll link it below, but this is the example that I used in that video. Here in our page.tsx, we have this images grid here, and this is the images grid. Now when you click on this, it's supposed to navigate you to /photo/the photo ID, and I have a page for that. So when you go to photo/the ID, it's going to render this. So when I click on the first photo, it's supposed to take me to this page, but this sort of ruins the user experience, because if the user has to go back to all photos, it means they have to start from the beginning. What if they click this photo and they went to the next page? If they should navigate back to this page, it's going to take them to the beginning and then they have to scroll to the point where they are. Well, instead of doing that, you can intercept this route when the user is navigating to that photo, such that instead of the user going to the specific page for that photo, it's going to appear in a modal. And to implement this, the intercepting route uses this syntax. First, we have our parallel route, which you can see with the @ syntax. But under this parallel route, we now have this intercepting route where we have open parentheses, dot, and close parentheses with the intercepting route. And in this route, we have the ID, we also have the page. Let me zoom out a bit. Basically, what we are rendering in this page is a modal. Now, if I go to this route layout, remember again with parallel routes, the route layout is going to receive the modal, and you can see after the children here, I basically render the modal here. So what that means now is if I click on this, instead of navigating me to the dedicated page for this image, it is going to open a modal like this. And when I am done with the modal, I can close. You can see I am still here. If I come here and I click on this, it's going to open a modal. You can see even the URL changes. The URL is photo/the photo ID, but it doesn't take us to the dedicated page for the photo ID, and that's because I intercepted the route. And if I close this, you see it doesn't take us to the beginning of the home page. I can stay where I'm at. But then if you copy the link address of this and you give to someone and they paste it, it's not going to open in the modal, it's going to open in the right dedicated page. So the intercepting route happens when a user is clicking the link, not when the user is visiting the link on the URL. Again, I have a video on this where I go into more detail on how to set this up, but this is how this feature allows you to intercept some routes and improve the user experience of your your applications. There are more things in Next.js like layout, suspense, streaming. I'll be covering all of that in subsequent videos, but I hope that this video helped you understand all of the routes in Next.js, looking at the pages and the app router.